Hello, everyone, and welcome back to another episode of Parenting is Easy, Said No One Ever. I'm your host, Chananya Abraham, and today I have for you an amazing conversation with Gabriela Deambrosio, who is an educational consultant based on the East Coast, West Coast, all over America right now. And I'm so happy that I have the opportunity to speak to her before the school year starts. You know, there are so many things when it comes to the school year that are important to make sure that we're setting up our kid for their education. The way I like thinking about it is when you eat some food, it's not just about the food itself that really brings about the taste, but it's the atmosphere, the ambiance, the setting, where you're eating it and how you're eating it and who you're eating it with that really adds to the experience around that food. When it comes to education, it works the same way. So it's not just about the school. It's not just about the classmate. There are so many things that come to mind when it comes to making sure our kids are having the right education that they need for themselves, whether it's getting involved with principals, chiropractors, neuropsych evaluators, physical therapists, speech therapists. There's so many different things when it comes to making sure that our kids' education is taken care of at home, at school, in the community, with family at large and their peers. And I think there's a very refreshing, but yet very, very informative light that Gabriela brings to the table. So I hope you enjoyed and really gained from this episode. She has some great links and some great ways that you can really work on these things. We're going to post her links in the show notes, and I highly recommend you reaching out to her. And at the same time, if you have questions that may be a follow-up to this awesome conversation, please feel free to reach out to us, and maybe some other comments or questions you might have at parentingiseasypodcast@gmail.com. You can follow us on social media at Parenting is Easy, said no one ever. And instead of ONE, it's the number one. Or you can like and follow anywhere you listen to your podcast. So sit back and enjoy this awesome episode. I think there are so many different areas that we can talk about that our audience here and our community can really benefit from hearing from you as a educational consultant. And I think the first area I would like to get into, just have a conversation with you, is, are there things that us as parents don't know when it comes to education, when it comes to dealing with a school system, that maybe, as from your experience, you would say, I wish parents knew this, whether it's in private sector, whether it's in the public school sector? Are there certain things, you know, as having a number of children within the system, I think there's so many things that I don't know what it is that I don't know. So asking that to you as someone that has been doing this for a while, what would you say are the things that parents should really know more about?
It's a great question, and I know that it can be really scary, especially when you go into the schools and maybe your child is one of many in a public school. Perhaps your child's teacher has 100 to 200 students on their caseload. If they're in elementary school, there might be 30 in a class. So what I heard Chananya say earlier is that a parent is their biggest advocate for their child, and I couldn't agree more, because as a teacher, as a classroom teacher for 12 years in Connecticut, New York, and California, in public and private schools, I noticed that you are under very strict parameters of what you're allowed to say and what you can't say. And it's not something that you want to impose yourself upon, because, again, the teacher's not a psychologist, nor they're the therapist, nor are they trained as a special education teacher. And I think special education training is so rare and haphazardly done from teachers' colleges across the nation, that the one thing that parents miss out on is early identification of their child's needs. So a child will go...
Early identification of the child's needs. Can you just define what that means?
A child's needs are identified early if they're 5 and under, but if they go past, 5, 6, 7, 8 years old, or even up to 13, and their needs have been unidentified, that can really lead into some secondary disabilities developing, because not only is the student suffering with a learning disability that they don't know about and the parents don't know, so maybe they're pushing in one direction while they need another, but they're also developing a sense of self-worth that is attached to this low executive functioning, and it's not something that's congruent with what their identity wants or needs for themselves. And so they become school avoidant, right? And that's become a secondary issue. So actually, what I like to inform parents about is that don't rely on your teachers to actually pull you aside and say, your son or your daughter has XYZ. We're not allowed to do that. You actually need to go to the doctor, look up your insurance, and find out who the local neuropsychologist is, bring your child in person. If you suspect something, that's probably something to follow your gut about and go and check it out. A neuropsych report actually is a roadmap to your child's brain. Now, I know that there's a lot of fear about overdiagnosing, but what this really does is at least gives you some kind of mechanism to bring to the school then later and give them a tool that they can use to individualize for your child, which I love getting those IEP plans, right? As a teacher, it was
Right.
really helpful. But if you don't do that yourself, the teachers aren't really allowed to do that on your behalf. And the special education teacher is one or two in the whole building. So that would be my one recommendation, is that whether you suspect something or not, maybe somebody in your family has ADHD, it's worth going to get tested for. There's no shame about it.
Yeah, so some great points here that I want to sort of pull apart a little bit more over here. And then we get back to the point that I like to call learning trauma and educational trauma, and we'll get back to that in a second. But I want to go back to what you were saying regarding neuropsych and finding a proper neuropsychologist. Can you talk about that a little bit? I know that's something that it could be hard to find. What are we searching for? What questions should we be asking to make sure that we're getting the right treatment and letting them know where we are coming from as parents, and setting up the whatever report that they're giving, how to deliver that in a respectful and proper collaborative way to the school. How would you recommend we can go about that? But starting with first finding the right neuropsych and the right fit for our child, where we can look for that.
So there's a lot of questions here too, because it depends on what type of school your child goes to. And I have found that independent schools are not obligated to adhere to any type of individualization unless they're a special education school. So if your child's going to a really nice independent school that you trust, they're not obligated to follow this neuropsychologist plan or recommendations, and they would be less trained to do so unless it was special education. If you're in the public schools, because of the state mandates and regulations, what you would do is you would bring the neuropsych to the school. If there's actually any learning disabilities that are diagnosed, then they would put into place a 504 plan, and you would request. You have to request. Here's the one thing that I urge all parents to know. You must request in writing. Otherwise, nobody will follow through. But it's a legal mandate. Once you put it in writing to the principal and the special education director, I would like to request an IEP or a 504 review for my child.
Can you just talk about that for a second? The difference between what an IEP is and what a 504 is, how to go about them, and when would they be apropos in different types of situations?
Yeah. So an IEP is an individualized education plan, right? And under the IDA, as a nation, students who with disabilities are eligible for services. And through the public schools, teachers are mandated to have their master's degrees, versus at independent schools, they may not. They're excellent people, excellent teachers, but they may not be as qualified. So if you're in the public system and you're going for an IEP or a 504 section would be a little bit less services, would be more for an ADHD student, and they would receive additional time, maybe some verbal and written instructions. Perhaps they would receive some special education resource room services, some executive functioning services, but they wouldn't get a robust level of services that an IEP student would get, which maybe looks like specialized busing or alternative classroom placement, or just a more specialized level of instruction, depending on if the student
The testing in the classroom setting.
Yeah. And so all of that is really linked to dollars, if you think about it that way. And the school, not that they have a prerogative, but they do have limited funding. So sometimes I've noticed that they may resist adopting IEPs or 504s given the increasing cost. Now, they have to if the student is eligible for that, but you do have to go in knowing what you're talking about. And I do recommend going in at least with an educational representative to help you, because the meetings go really fast. They're really intense, full of jargon. And if you don't know how to stop it or request certain services, which if you weren't trained in it, you wouldn't know how to do, then I think a lot of students don't get certain services because the teachers don't think that they need them. But the parent's the biggest advocate. But additionally, the parent can't know everything and can't do everything.
Okay. So you just mentioned a educational advocate or consultant, right?
Yep.
I'm curious. Can you talk a little bit about that? Because I've never heard of this term before.
I threw a lot of educational jargon at you, and I think you have a very good point and valid point that it can be overwhelming. And there are educational advocates who are special education advocates in every city because what they do, and a lot of them have the experience of either working in the schools in special education or they are a parent. Um, they're not legal representation like a special education attorney, which is specialized, which I do recommend if, in certain cases. But if you're just looking for an advocate, that's somebody who can go in, translate what they're saying from the district to the parent, be able to advocate for what the student needs in the appropriate manner. They might have a relationship with the district already. But an educational consultant is actually somebody who can support the parents find an appropriate school for their kid if they do need to change. And I always, my perspective is that if the flower is in the wrong environment, they will not bloom. But if the flower is in the right environment with the right nurture and the right materials and conditions, they will absolutely bloom. So having those pieces in place, like the right school, the right teachers, the right advocate, which also leads to funding, and the right after school activities and extracurriculars and integration in nature, I think a student will thrive. It's really when they get far away from that nature and play that they start to struggle. And you see that when kids are doing a lot of things on technology, they're in large classrooms, they have undiagnosed learning disabilities, or perhaps they're just not really like curious or interested in what's happening in the classroom.
Yeah, you bring up some really good points over there, and I think the thing that I'm picking up mainly is every child is different, and we have to make sure that we're dealing with every child individually different. And I do really want to get back to that learning trauma, but as you're talking, something else that came up for me is medications, and I think something that in some ways can be a really big help, and in the same way, some ways can be very intimidating and a taboo, and parents don't know much about it. I'm curious if you could just talk for a minute about medication, and let's say, unless you say specifically, and I know this resonates with some people that I know listen to this because of questions that have sort of come in and things that we've talked about, is when a teacher or a school approaches a parent base and say, maybe you should be taking your child for some assessment because they might need medication. Like, how can parents go about dealing with that in a way where, like, oh, it really, my child needs medication? Like, maybe you need to control the classroom. So how can we go about dealing with that in a way that is, I guess you'd say, beneficial for everyone?
That's really hard because the school approaching parents in that way isn't fair in some ways. It's the psychiatrist that needs to prescribe medication. So, recommending an assessment, that means that they need an assessment. And that is a part in the child's life where the parent needs to recognize, why is this hurting me? Is this about me or is this about my
Mm.
child? Because if this is something that hurts you, I beg you to put that aside because your child needs you to rise to that occasion and go get the assessment. It's about their learning needs. And so that's the one thing that I think parents have a hard time is like, what, my child doesn't need this or this. Actually, all children are different. And the more access they have to what they specifically need, which is not what the parent needs at all, they're very different usually, is going to be a profound difference in growth. So I do think a lot of it is an internal struggle, not my child. But if you think about it this way, there's 30% of people that are neurodiverse. So your child is not alone. There's many other parents that have been approached. There are tactful special education directors, and there are not so tactful people, like in every field. And I hope that the conversation is had with compassion, because the thing is, we just want all students to succeed. And if they're squirrely in the classroom, or if they're ripping down the posters, or if they're crumpled up papers in their backpack, it's not our place to say you need medicine. It's our place to say we need to support your executive functioning.
Oh, I like that. Okay, so executive functioning. What can parents know more about making sure that there is the proper age appropriate and grade appropriate executive functioning? And when should there be more intervention assessed or looked into?
Well, I think parents have the hardest job in the world, and I just congratulate them for trying. I'm an inauthentic perspective as a non-parent, and but I've met so many parents. I've had more than 2,000 students, and so I've worked with a lot of parents, and I have to say that the parents that are involved, that advocate, I love them the most. They push me the most. They are the ones that get what their kids need, and they do it without ego. And I'm impressed by them fully. So I will say, put yourself out there and ask for the professional's advice. People are more willing to help than not. And it is worth it to pursue the assessment because maybe your kid needs executive functioning or not, but you're not going to know that until the child is starting to do independent work, which can be late. And so that's not going to be something that's assessed until the child is a little bit older. However, learning needs like autism or nonverbal learning disabilities or ADHD or anxiety and depression is coming up really early with kids these days, especially since COVID. Those are really important that do need some focus and training and therapy and services, speech pathology, you name it. There's everything out there, and it's best to hone early because the kids that get the early intervention, they don't need services in high school. But the kids that wait because maybe there's a lot going on in the family, there's many kids in the family. Usually I see that happening. There's like a bunch of brothers and sisters, and there's somebody hiding because they're always kind of well behaved, if that makes sense. But they're not exactly performing
Yeah,
in
yeah,
school.
100%. I think it's something really important. So how can parents sort of make sure that there's a healthy way to sort of voice their frustrations, whether it's reaching out to the school or the board or something, and also maybe keeping it home within their spouse or partner at home? How can parents make sure that their kids don't hear or experience the parental frustration?
Well, I have a good response for you, and it's intercultural. My background, I grew up all over the world, and teachers are treated differently in different countries. And this is a good example. In South America, in the UK, teachers are treated like the professionals that they are. It takes so much work to do what we do, and the level of fatigue is very difficult. A lot of the teachers are also parents themselves. What I have to say to this is that what I noticed in the UK and South America is that at home, the teacher is revered. They're, something that they've asked this child to do, they're, supporting the child to do it at home. And then behind closed doors, they might call the school and say, I had a really hard time with this project. My child and I spent 3 hours on it. It was too long. Is it possible that we can modify for my child? But really approaching the teacher from a place of gratitude and acceptance and non-judgment because of that level of fatigue is so important. I will say that it is very difficult to work with parents who are constantly negative. You will give more of yourself to the parents that treat you with respect. And also, the problem is that what people don't realize is that in admissions, school admissions, with teachers, with all sorts of different activities like camps, we judge the parents much more harshly than the child. So your child might not be accepted to something if you are pushing in that manner.
Mm. Oh, wow, that's interesting. And I guess that makes sense as well because, and that's something I ever thought of. But if we're trying to bring a child into a certain situation, then who the child lives with is going to be part of that situation. So if we're going to include them into the system, into this school, then obviously where they come from is going to have to be a part of it as well. Which I guess goes into this theory. I'm working in a school shortly after graduating grad school. One of the things that there was a concept that came about through a supervisor of mine and sort of came up with it together is that every child has a triangle of support, and one is the home, one is the community, and one is the school. And there has to be at least one of those three for a child to be emotionally happy so that they can be receptive to work. And I think the more of those triangles you have, the more a child will be able to go ahead and be within themselves. At the same time, to also realize, and this is coming from, I think his name is Dr. Jacob Ham, who is the head of the Child Trauma Center in Mount Sinai in New York, and he talks about the concept of when there is intensive feelings, the child being able to be receptive to any sort of educational learning. It's sort of like having a boulder that they're trying to push up a hill because they're not able to go ahead and bring information. So now have a conversation with someone that's pushing a boulder up a hill. Very, very difficult. But the flatter the plane that they're pushing the boulder on, the easier it is to have a conversation with them and for them to be receptive to whatever it is you're trying to give over to them. So when they have at least one of those three corners of the triangle, it becomes a lot easier to deal with. And obviously, the more corners you have, a lot easier it can be. And I think by us having a situation where we're trying to be the best without realizing that we're not going to be perfect, and accepting that and realizing the school is there to help me. And that's my job. And like we started saying today, is that the school is here to help us. And it's us as parents that we have a responsibility to make sure that our kids' education is taken care of properly and for what they need. And if that means sometimes having to be more involved as a parent, having to have interventions, having to change things up at home, nighttime routine, or even daytime routine within ourselves, that's going to be something that we're going to have to do. And that will allow the child to have a more even playing field in whatever it is that they're doing. And I think this concept of the child is the responsibility of the parent, and the parent is the one that has to take care of the child's education, knowing what's best for that child. And the school and the school system is there to help the child and the parents, and not vice versa. And I'm curious if you could talk about that for a minute, just regarding making sure the parents have the right mindset when it comes to their child and not using school as a babysitting service.
Oh, wow. Yeah, no, I know. That's like an old saying, right? School is a lot of things in the States. And in the Northeast in particular, there are some really great public schools that I've had the privilege of working at and interning at. And parents, like I said, have the hardest job in the world. So while they're at work, I'm hoping that their child is gaining literacy and math skills, that they're exploring history and playing with peers and gaining social skills. I've not heard a parent really refer to school as a babysitting service in a while, but what's happening is that we don't have a teacher shortage. We have like teachers refusing to go back to the classroom. So it's turning into a babysitting situation because of this like mass exodus of teachers, high quality educational instructors, and engaging instructors in the classroom. There's no shortage of us. We're all here. We're just happy doing other jobs now. But the problem is that if we did come around and rally around our teachers in the way that I do see in other cultures, I do think our teachers will come back to the classroom. If we collaborated as pillars, like you said, around our kiddos, they could go from the day to the home, back to the day seamlessly instead of with a fight. So I think that this is a call to action for our parents and our teachers to come together and not fight, because the little things don't really matter. Those assignments at the end of the year aren't going to really matter. What matters is the relationship, how the teacher made the kid feel. And if the parent is making the teacher feel poorly on a weekly basis, that does translate and the child does absorb that. And unfortunately, the fact of the matter is that many teachers do get burnt out because of the parents in particular.
Yeah, that's such a good point. And I think when respect is given, then respect is given in that sense. And I think that's something that, when we are like you were saying, this is happening internationally, when we're putting the teachers on a pedestal, as they should be. I mean, I think if you took a poll of the most underpaid profession out there, I think most of us would probably put teachers somewhere in the top 2 or 3. They're because of the things that they do and that what they have to deal with. But at the same time, when we are able to go ahead and put them on a pedestal, so our kids see that, so then our kids are going to treat them in a certain way. And when the teacher feels like they're put on a certain point of view from the parents and from the child, so then be able to teach that child is going to be so much easier. And when you give yourself permission to give the respect to the teacher, then it will be reciprocated. And I think that's a really good point. I'm so glad that you brought that up, because I think that's something that we can all do more of. Just like
And I agree with you just about the teachers, being respected, but I don't know about the pedestal because that's a complicated factor, but I agree with you on the respect part, and then your child's education will enhance. But I will say at the end of the school year, if you look at 40 kids in the classroom, maybe 2 or 3 parents reach out and say thank you. So that's something that always surprised me at the end of the year.
Yeah, that's a good point. And for those of you that are going to be listening to this sometime in May or June, just remember to write that email, pick up the phone. It might even be better, and just say thank you for the year and for what people have done for our kids. And I think the more we're able to do that and have that gratitude, I think this school in general, the whole atmosphere and the whole experience that our kids are going to have will be a lot easier. And I think that's something that we can really work together with, as long as we make a partnership and knowing who's in charge and who's going to be working with things and taking our responsibilities. I think is so important for this. And there's so many things that we can talk about in this world of education and advocacy. It would behoove me if I didn't talk about technology and the role of technology when it comes to our children. And I'm curious what you've seen, and more specifically, this is being recorded in the summer of 2024, and what you've seen more recently regarding the ways to have a healthy balance with education, both in the classroom and at home, and how parents can also be an advocate towards the school to make sure that technology is being used properly.
This is such a gut-wrenching issue. And the more years I have on me, the more intense this issue becomes for me. Because as a person with ADHD herself, I went paperless. And it was the best thing for my classroom, for my high school seniors and juniors. That was epic for their college preparation. So I have nothing but the greatest respect for what technology did for the classroom, and it enabled everything that I could do. But I also want to go back in history and prevent Facebook and MySpace and iPhones from ever coming into existence. If that would be my superpower, that would be it. I am a proponent for flip phones now, if they even have a phone, or those special parental phones that are a watch and they have some pre-dialed people like their grandparents and their parents and guardians and maybe a friend, a green light friend. But I know that in my world, kids get stalked online and they talk to people that they shouldn't be, and that they get into the biggest amount of SHIT I've ever seen. You can't even make up, because of technology. And your kids are better at tech than you'll ever be. And no matter what parental control you put on, they'll find a way around it.
Can you say that one more time? I want to make sure.
Go on and on.
Say that last sentence one more time, please.
What was it?
That last sentence regarding the kids will know more than us. I think that's really important for us parents to hear one more time.
On my last podcast, I said this too. Your child at 3 years old can undo any parental control that you've put in place for a 15-year-old. I've seen it.
There you go.
I'm terrified for you. But also, there are ways, and there are excellent therapists and people who provide technology tools for you. I'm working on one myself for families, but something that is really impressive that I've seen certain therapists do are technology planning with families and teaching parents how to go through their child's tech together. What they have access to at school is also huge. I would find kids in the classroom all the time doing things that they weren't supposed to be doing on the school computers that had way more alert and safety procedures than we do at home. And so they love to hack. Let's teach them how to hack and code ethically. Let's teach them how to do all that building robotics ethically. They want to do it, but we need to allow them the space to do it in a proper manner, because the danger out there is so much more than we've ever had. And it has led to child anxiety and depression and suicide rates that are unbelievable in our children. They want to stay on their phone and TikTok in bed instead of go out and get their driver's license and go to a party. The kids have no interest in socializing in person. I've never seen anything like it. This is an emergency.
Saying what our kids are going to be able to do regarding coding, regarding technology, is above and beyond anyone that grew up in a world without cell phones and CD players only. So I think that's something that we're able to use. We just have to, as parents, be on top of it, and that goes back to sort of as we close up over here, being able to understand that we, as parents, we are in control. Don't let our kids control us. Don't let the school system control us. We have control. So stay curious. Be in a place to ask questions in a non-judgmental way so that we can get to the bottom of it. Work with someone that is a advocate that can understands the jargon a lot better than we do. I'm saying for those of you that might have to be Googling what IEP is, Google it. If you don't know what it is, that's okay. There's nothing wrong with that. If you want to understand what a 504 plan is, do that too. That's great. You'll know more information. It's so important to know more information. But understand that as parents, we have the control. And I think, people talk about, so what's the future going to look like, whether you're listening to this in America or listening to this somewhere else? I think a lot of it starts with the parent. A lot of it starts with who we are and how we're going to go about things. And it's up to us. We have to be able to teach things in a way where it's something that we can grow with, not be opposed to, in whatever types of situations that we're dealing with. But there are so many great things that you touched on. I'm so glad that you're able to talk about this, both the technology and understanding, how to go about things to deal with the school in a certain way. Are there certain things, Gabriela, as we sort of close up over here, that we haven't talked about when it comes to advocacy for our children that you usually do talk about with parents, or something you would like people to know that, maybe we haven't talked about, or I haven't asked you about on the podcast today?
Well, I'm really honored to be here and talk to parents. I know that, like I said, it's the hardest job, and it's often feels like you're all alone, but there's so many support groups out there. So finding healthy outlets is the best way. People are eager to tear down and commiserate. So I would just urge you to find, an uplifting community. But the other thing too is that whatever you're asking your child to do, you need to lead by example. And I'm sorry, but your children do exactly what you do. So when the kid comes in and they're doing something in class and then I meet with the parent, it really is the same behavior. So, everyone's phone goes in the box and we're not looking at it. Or maybe instead of a movie night, we're doing Lego night, and we're down on the ground with our kids. Doesn't matter how old they are. We're cooking together. I think just like that integration of what you want to see. So many of my parents, I remember one parent in particular, we were talking about how their kid in high school wouldn't stop smoking and drinking and going out, and how that was getting in the way of school and everything. And so I said, okay, well, let's really get into this. Let's get them a mentor. Let's get them all settled at the new school, and then go to their house. And then the parents are doing that every night too. Or there's like signs about drinking all over the house, or there's just certain like signals that are incongruent with what the parent's trying to impose. So that level of like, well, you're trying to control me, but like, what about you? That's what I'm going to put out to parents, that I can't imagine how hard it is to like do this lifestyle that you want your child to do. But if you can do it, they can do it.
Yeah, beautiful. Very, very well said. I cannot thank you enough for the words of wisdom here and pearls of wisdom that you've given us here. Where can people find more of you and about you and contact you?
Thank you for asking. I do have a website, and how can I give it to you to pass out? My company is called Edusphere Consulting, and you can find me on LinkedIn as well, Gabriela Deambrosio. And please reach out. I'm happy to have a no strings attached conversation, because really I think parents need to have access to information that should be well accessible, but it's not. So happy to just talk about your kiddo and see if there's something we can do.
Amazing. I'm going to post all your links that you've sent me to in our show notes and post it everywhere. And if anyone has anything they want to talk about more, obviously you could email the podcast at parentingiseasypodcast@gmail.com. Follow us on social media as well, and we'll sort of get you in contact with Gabriela. As we sort of finish up over here, I love asking some rapid fire questions over here. And you touched on one before, so I'm going to ask it at first. It's usually the last one I ask. But if you were to have superpower, a mundane, everyday superpower that would help with you dealing and working with children, what would that be?
Mind reader.
Okay, that was easy. Yeah, I hear that. What would be a place, whether it's a book, a YouTube, or someone to follow, or podcast that you would recommend people can get more information when it comes to education?
Oh, Brene Brown. She's a genius.
Okay, enough said. We can try to post a few of her books. Is there one or two in particular that stand out?
Um, no, but just her work in general on working on yourself is the most important way. And she's a parent and she talks about her parenting too. So she's inspiring for all.
Yeah, I'm actually as you're talking, I realize I'm gonna actually try to post a link to her one of her TED talks on guilt, which I think is such an important message for us as parents to be able to internalize ourselves so that we can be better parents. And I guess my last question for you right now is if you could think of someone in history, and it cannot be a relative, that you would be okay with being a babysitter for children, who would that be?
For their children or for them as a child?
Or for that person to be a babysitter for either your children, nieces and nephews, or future children of yours?
A person in history.
Huh.
What a good question. It's not Mary Poppins, I'll tell you that much.
That would have been a
um,
good answer. Yeah, I hear that.
oh my goodness, this is so difficult. You know what? I'm going to just be honest. The one person that's coming to mind who is just way too qualified to be a babysitter is she's a superintendent of schools in Minnesota. Her name is Dr. Mary Perry Reed. She's the smartest woman I've ever had the privilege of working with. And she's a school leader and fierce woman.
Amazing. I love it. Okay, I'm gonna Google her because I've never heard her name before. But thank you so much for that, and thank you so much for your time today. This has been an absolute pleasure.
Thank you so much. Have a good one.